Hello everybody and welcome to the Engineer's Blueprints. This episode we're going to be talking about the Payload map, Upward. We're starting off this new series on a strong note with probably one of the most popular maps in TF2, and for a good reason. Upward is widely considered to be one of the most balanced, well-designed payload maps in the game, and is most notable for being fun to play on as pretty much any class. But of course, the class that we're going to be talking over strategies for today is the Engineer, and I can tell you that this is definitely one of my favorite maps to play Engie on, so I'm going to have a lot of fun talking about all the cool stuff that you can do on this map. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to be talking about each point individually, starting from the first point, working my way to the last. At each point I'll talk about typical building placements and why they're effective. And then I'll go into more specific playstyles and strategies for that general area. So we're going to be going over defense, aka red team first, and then when we're done with that, we'll be starting all the way back over again and then talking specifically about offense, aka blue team. And what you've been seeing on screen while I've been talking this whole time have been the callouts that I'll be using over the course of this video, so make sure you take a glance at some of the names that are being used so you don't get confused. And yeah, so I think we're about ready to start off here. So the first thing that you want to do as Engineer, as you will do on pretty much every payload map, is roll out and start placing your buildings. Automatically, you're going to have a teleporter up at spawn, and then when you get to the first cap point, you want to place your exit. So a popular spot is right behind the little house here in this little nook. Just make sure it's facing away from the wall, and this is probably the best place for people to spawn into since it's out of the line of fire, but it's also right up close to where the battles will be happening near the cap point. I've also seen people put their teleporter exits up here on the platform called Playground, and this can be a pretty good spot, but the main issue is that when people come out of the exit here, they are likely to cross a pretty nasty sniper sightline, so just be careful about using that one if the blue team has a few snipers looking up here. Not to mention a lot of cheeky soldiers and demo men like to jump up here to kill your team's snipers and get a high angle on the people taking cover below, so it's likely to get camped from time to time. Overall, only put a teleporter here if you're confident that your team can handle the aggressive placement. And speaking of aggressive placement for teleporters, the furthest forward that you should even consider putting the teleporter exit is right up here in the corner near the stairs. This will bring your team right up into the thick of everything, and I don't really recommend it, but if your team seems to be handling themselves and are basically pulling off a spawn camp, I guess it could be justified. A complete opposite version of that sort of aggression would be to place the exit all the way back here behind these rocks. This one can be pretty hard to spot and can open up a lot of opportunities for ninjaneering later on. Just be careful that you let your teammates know that if they back up after they take the teleporter, they will fall to their death. Also, behind the rocks here is a popular decloaking spot for blue spies, so it might be the victim of a sapper or possibly even get camped if you're not careful. Moving on to the dispenser, you'll almost always find Engineers putting it right next to this medium health pack in the little cubby here, which works mainly because that's where a lot of people retreat to since they know for sure that's where there's health, but I prefer to spread the healing sources out, so if you're into the concept of communication, you can let your team know that there's a dispenser in this little hole near the minecart. I personally like putting it here because it allows the players who are fighting on the stairs to retreat a minimal distance away to get their health back. I think it's really important that demo men and heavies are on these stairs, spamming over this hill and denying people from peeking down into the valley here, so allowing your team to stay there for longer can be really good. It also prevents your teammates from having to walk from the stairs to the cubby, which is a really devastating sniper sightline. The even more aggressive dispenser spot is up near the top of these stairs, but just like the teleporter being up here, it can be pretty risky just because it's so close to the front lines. If you want to play a little bit more passively on the first point, you can just put your dispenser behind the house near the common teleporter exit spot so that your team can fall back to an even more safe location out of the way from spam that will be coming down from the top of the stairs. The cubby is a common spot to hide, but it can be a double-edged sword in that it's really easy to spam out from the cliff and really easy to trap out a lot of people with an uber charge, so just keep that in mind when deciding where to place your dispenser. You don't want to be the cause of a team wipe just because your teammates are all gathered around in one area that was really easy to spam out. And the sentry gun is very commonly placed somewhere around this house here. I see a lot of newer Engineers opting to place it inside of the cubby, and while this spot can certainly work against a team without heals or a general sense of awareness, I advise against putting the gun here just because of how easy it is to destroy from around the corner, even without an uber charge. I think your best bet is to put the gun a little bit behind the house so that it can see the staircase, the point, and also cover a bit of the flank as well. This area is a good place to play because once the enemy team sees it and decides to uber charge into it, they have a long distance to walk before they even get close to it. This makes ubered classes that rely on being close to their targets like heavies, pyros, or even soldiers less effective at taking out the gun when it's this far away. It also provides a safe area for your team to fall back to so that they don't get chased down by scouts or pyros. And putting the sentry up on top of the playground can definitely work out for you, but remember, it's pretty easy for jumping classes to get up up there and harass you, so just be aware of that. Overall, it can be effective for a few enemies to find it there and get killed based off of the surprise factor, but don't expect it to not get retaliated against soon afterwards when they respawn. I've seen a few engineers putting their sentry guns up in this aggressive spot near the top of the stairs, but as you should know by now, this is almost too aggressive and will only really work if the blue team has little to no basic problem solving abilities, because it's way too easy for an Ubered, or not even just an overhealed heavy, to just wreak havoc on everything in this corner in just a few seconds. Now I want to take a little bit of time to talk about mini sentries as well, and I know you might be thinking, dang, minis on defense? What the heck are you even talking about? Well, I personally think that in pubs anything can work, but if you play it right, minis on defense is actually a pretty damn viable strategy, so I'm going to be including the gunslinger in all of my overviews of any point where I think it could work well. This first point's battlefield is separated by this hill here, which makes aggressive sentry guns that peek over the hill pretty effective, but they also get focused down very easily because of how close they are. This is bad for leveled sentries, which take a lot of time and metal to build back up again, but it's perfect for mini sentries, which are disposable and very easy to quickly replace. I like to put the mini behind this rock here because it shoots people who are fighting on the hill just before the top of the stairs. Most of the time, the blue team members are going to be focused on looking forward and shooting the people who are fighting them over in that area, so a lot of the time you can get a ton of free damage on distracted enemies, and even in a worst case scenario, your mini is a distraction that your team's power classes can take advantage of in order to just lay into them. Another reason why minis are so effective on the first point are the amount of bushes that you can hide the gun in, which makes it really difficult for your enemy to know exactly where they're taking damage from before it's too late. My favorite bushes include this one next to this rock, kind of serves as a more passive version of the place that I talked about previously. This one right outside of the cubby, and even back here in this little bush so that the flank is a little bit more protected when you get pushed back. Before the round starts, you can hide the mini in bushes up near their spawn to try for some cheeky kills on aggressive players who immediately run right out of the gate. My favorite spot to put it in right away is behind this little board. It's pretty difficult to see when you're looking at it from the spawn door, and it can actually still shoot through that board, believe it or not. You can also put it in the little bush near the leftmost spawn to catch some unaware players off guard when they come out of the door, and you could also put it behind this little rock. Because the minis are so easily replaced and basically disposable, you can take the setup time to put it in some random spot where no one would even think to look, just to get some free damage on people right away. Even if they destroy it, you can just build another one. So those are basically all of the common building placements for the first point. Now the general strategy of Upward first is pretty simple. Be solid, play defensively, but don't be afraid to back out. On Payload map first points in general, the blue team has an automatic advantage over the red team because they have their spawn room so close. They have a payload cart to heal off of, and their respawn timer is much shorter. Not to mention, blue team will likely have a free Uber charge to use right when the round starts, so if you don't think your team is doing so hot at keeping them away from your buildings, don't hesitate to just start moving that gear back to the second point. Second is honestly a much easier point to hold anyway. This hill right here serves as the marker for the front line limit, especially when you're playing as engineer. You should very rarely, if not ever, be extending over this hill. There will be a sniper sitting in spawn looking for your yellow helmeted head to poke over the horizon, so just don't do it. You're going to want to make the enemy come to you. After all, the entire purpose of playing on defense is to waste time and delay the enemy's ability to push the cart. If the blue team stays in spawn the whole game, you'll win, so there's literally no reason to walk into the enemy. That's what they're supposed to be doing. Now before we move on, it's also important to note that when you retreat from the first point, be really careful about walking up this hill. You expose yourself to snipers who have left the safety of their spawn to stand on the stairs or on the roof, and they will be able to see you while you're walking up here. So if you have the rescue ranger equipped, it could be a good idea to wait until you're out of the sniper sight line to pick up the sentry gun, just in case you get killed while walking away from the first point. So yeah, holding the second point is often much easier depending on how gracefully your team was able to give up the first point. Hopefully enough of the red team survived in order to not allow the blue team to take control of the area above the tunnel, because it's very important for holding second that you're able to walk around near the point without getting spammed out or sniped. So ideally, you want to build your stuff in this area so your team can easily keep control of it. However, if you get pressured out, you can just fall back to the passive positioning, which is actually more commonly seen in pubs right here on this porch area. I'll get more into why I personally prefer playing this point more aggressively up on the hill after we go over the building placements, but for the forward hold, you want to put your sentry gun somewhere that aggressively watches the cap point. Personally, I like this little spot to the right of the tunnel exit because it can see people who are pushing the cart, and you can keep an eye on it from from above the tunnel exit or from the stairs leading up to the porch, just in case you need to rescue ranger it out of there. You could also put it a little bit more to the left, practically on the tracks leading up to the cap point for a little bit more of an aggressive angle, but for this placement I recommend using the Wrangler, just in case you get a soldier or a sniper spamming you from all the way back in the tunnel. The main reason why I like putting it over here is because it allows your team to play forward on the cliff, so that when soldiers and demomen peek over and start to aggress, or even if they pop an Uber into your team, your sentry gun will be waiting for them on the other side and they won't even see it until it also sees them. This gun also watches the cart, the cap point, and the cliffside flank all at once, not to mention it's so far away from everything that the only direction that a spy can approach the sentry without being really obvious is from the tunnel. Because of how open the area around the gun is, however, I'd say that the rescue ranger is basically a requirement here, so that you can heal the sentry gun without putting yourself in the way of spam coming over the hill or from the tunnel, and it also gives you the option to move the sentry gun back just in case the hill gets overrun and you need to pull it back. If you want to play really aggressive, you can put it right here, just barely peeking over this slope, which is great for denying people walking up here, and it's really difficult to hit since a lot of the hitbox is hidden behind the slight incline. Just be wary of the tunnel side exit because the cheeky scouts could run up and shoot you while you're maintaining the gun. The dispenser should be up on the hill with your team. A really great spot is behind the rocks up on the top of the tunnel exit. It allows the heavy to basically shoot infinitely while being semi-protected. Just keep an eye on the flank because soldiers and scouts really like to jump up from the cliffside to be a nuisance. You can also put it just outside of the tunnel side exit here, but just remember to be wary of a bunch of people pushing out of there from the tunnel and into your indisposed teammates. On the second point, the teleporter is kind of useless because of how close your spawn room is to the control point, but if you do feel like putting it somewhere, I suggest putting it either inside the tunnel side exit so you can send your teammates either to the hill directly or into the tunnel to help keep people off the cart. If anything, it can be used as an alert system for if there's any enemies attempting to flank through there. You can also put the tele exit in the apartments, but just be careful coming out of the door because you expose yourself to a pretty open sniper sight line, and it can be difficult to tell if your team is even keeping the hill under control from inside the house until you've already walked outside onto the platform. I don't suggest building anywhere in or around the B hut because the sentry gun just doesn't deny enough area over there, and it's really susceptible to getting sniped or otherwise damaged from outside of its range. I also don't recommend building anywhere inside of this tunnel because of how enclosed it is, but I'll go more into that after we're done talking about the building placements. For the more passive hold where the enemy has taken control of the area above the tunnel but you still want to deny the point from being capped, the sentry gun should go somewhere on the porch here. To me, this placement is very Last Stand-esque because it can be really easy to push into. Soldiers and snipers can easily peek the gun from outside of its range by standing on the cliff or inside the B hut. Ubered heavies or demo man can just jump out of the apartment window on top of you and destroy everything before you even have time to react. Spies can decloak in this corner or underneath and can stab and sap pretty often. Scouts can very easily run up to the cart from the cliff and hide from the sentry gun's range to sneak a cap. There's just a bunch of ways to get through this hold. In general, when your sentry gun is on this porch and the cart is pushed up to outside of the tunnel, just be prepared to retreat as soon as you see any form of a push. It's just not worth the dedication. The dispenser can be placed in this corner, but be careful because snipers and soldiers can easily see it from the cliffside and behind the B hut and spam it out or headshot people who are using it. I personally recommend just placing it behind this wall because it encourages people to retreat out of a potential spammable area in order to get healed. When your team is pushed all the way back to practically right outside of their spawn, the need for teleporters is basically non-existent, so honestly don't even bother with wasting your metal on building a teleporter at this point. So those are generally all of the building placements for the second point. Now, as far as the holding strategy goes, I must stress how important it is to know the difference between a forward or an aggressive hold and a passive hold. Taking the cliff is what you want to be doing as often as possible because you force the enemy team to put in more work for more ground, and it allows you to have the height advantage on the cart and be more aware of the flank routes. If the enemy team has control of the hill area, playing passively on the porch is a good temporary hold until you can build up an Uber for a counter push to retake that ground, but don't rely on it too much because the weaknesses are much more plentiful than if you were to be playing more aggressively. When playing passively, don't be afraid to move back in order to survive longer to get a head start on a good defense on the next point. Now, you may be wondering why I didn't suggest building inside of the tunnel since it would be directly watching the cart path, but I personally don't recommend doing it because it's really easy to Uber into. And since you're in such an enclosed space, it makes it pretty difficult to avoid any type of coordinated push. Not to mention, if you take control of the tunnel but give up the area above it, it's really easy for your enemy to trap you in there and sandwich you from all angles. Anything can work in a pub given the right circumstances, but generally against most semi-intelligent teams, cornering yourself in an enclosed area is a one-way ticket to getting trampled over with nowhere to run. Now, before wrapping up the second point defense, I do want to mention again that mini sentries are completely viable on defense. It just allows you to be more mobile and play more like a flank class. Just putting your minis in the same places that you'd put your leveled guns works works wonders on this point. They deny jumping soldiers and overextending scouts just as well, and when you feel like it's becoming increasingly difficult to keep a regular sentry gun up, switching to minis to counteract an overly aggressive blue team can be a pretty smart play to make. Now, right when the second point is capped, red team's spawn room is moved all the way back to the last point, and the blue team's spawn room is moved into the tunnel, so you'll have to keep that in mind when placing your teleporter entrances. Now, the third point is the longest one, so just like second, it also has two ways to play it, aggressive and passive. I'll go over the building placements for those two holding styles before getting into the overall strategy here. The more aggressive hold basically takes advantage of the limited options that the blue team has as far as a good path for pushing into the red team goes. Basically, the only viable way to approach third is to shove everyone through this little choke here after walking through the house that the blue team typically holds in. So naturally, you want to put the sentry gun right in front of that, making their only task even more difficult. I like to put the sentry gun on this balcony here to overlook this entire choke point, but take note that the actual cart path isn't in its range, so I recommend using the Wrangler to spam at the cart when people try to push it. All you have around this area is one medium ammo pack, so I recommend saving your dispenser if you had one built up on the second point so you can have a reliable source of metal. Otherwise, you'll have to either retreat further back to get metal or use the Eureka effect to rotate between spawn and your nest. Also, don't build a sentry on the very edge of the balcony just because that makes it a little easier for a cheeky spy to sit underneath it and place a sapper on it without putting himself in harm's way. So just placing the gun a little further back can go a long way, and it also makes it that much harder to hit when approaching the gun from the low angle. You don't necessarily have to put the gun in that exact spot for it to be an effective way to deny the choke, though. You can place it in the corner for a little bit more of a passive-aggressive kind of thing. You can even put it on the corner of the edge of this upper platform to more effectively deny the cart. Just be aware of spies walking up to it and sapping it. You can also jump over to that platform by hopping on top of this sheet metal, or even by simply using a building placed on the ground next to it. Another great sentry spot is right on the edge of the cliff here overlooking the cart path, although this can be spammed out around the corner by explosive classes, so just be aware of that. On this point in general, it can be very effective to keep moving the sentry from place to place every few kills, just to keep the enemy on their toes, since there isn't a whole lot of ways to approach this point when the red team is playing forward. The dispenser works really well placed right next to the bottom of the stairs going up to the balcony because it allows your power classes to stay at the front of the choke and spam people out of it. The heavy can practically stay permanently revved up and firing down at people. It also provides infinite ammo sources for pyros to keep air blasting people off the cliff and stuffing ubercharge pushes who try to make their way up the slope. Just be sure to keep a close eye on the shit house because it can be really easy for a soldier or a demo man to flank underneath and get a really good angle on a big group of people crowded around the dispenser if that flank route is left unchecked. But if you find that this dispenser placement is too far forward, you can move it back to sit in the elbow. That way your teammates have a lot more cover to hide behind while they heal up. The teleporter isn't too important for a team who understands the layout of the map, but it's actually pretty common for newer players to ignore this drop down that you can access while third is still not capped. So if you don't see everyone using that to get to the front right away like they're supposed to, place the teleporter entrance in the front of the bottom spawn in order to encourage people to take it. Chances are they won't be walking out of the upper spawn door because it's not the most obvious thing that it actually takes you where you're supposed to be going. You can place the exit in the elbow so people are more hidden from view when they come through it, but they're still able to find the front line very quickly. You can even place it in this little bush a little further back, but you might not want to if you plan on using the next sentry spot, which is used when we get into the more passive hold here. Now, if the blue team has taken control of the choke and has resisted the amount of spam your team has been throwing down at them, the next option is to build back in the valley to deny them from getting overly aggressive while they attempt to push the cart up that long winding pathway near the edge of the cliff. A good passive-aggressive sentry spot is on the tracks in the middle of the valley, which allows your team to play closer to the edge of the cliff, denying people from leaving the choke and getting a clear view on the rest of the tracks leading up to the last point here. It also easily covers the last stretch of track leading up to the third cap point, and the knockback from a level 3 is more than enough to throw people off into their death. However, it's more susceptible to getting focused right away in an uber push, and any cheeky sniper who sits on the cart behind the bend can have a clear shot on you when you're repairing it, so just be ready to move it back if things are getting a little too hectic. The best way to play passively in the valley is to just deny the shithouse and keep jumping soldiers and scouts out of your team's hair while they hang out around you. Placing the sentry gun literally inside of this bush is a great idea for a temporary hold while you regroup. It doesn't watch the cap point, but because it's so easy for cart pushers to retaliate against it, it's not really worth it at this point. Just be ready to run away if you lose too much of your team team, or if the elbow or the spiral staircase area gets overrun, that's a good time to just walk through main and rescue Ranger the gun out of the way. Just try your best not to get sniped from the tracks. The dispenser in a passive holding position works best in this little corner near the door that connects the elbow and spiral, either right up against this wall or literally inside of the door frame, whichever one you think is safest at the time. If there's enemies in the elbow, the door frame dispenser could get damaged, so just be aware of where the flanking classes are currently playing. The teleporter is less important here because you want your team to be approaching the battlefield from main anyway, so if anything, the teleporter should be used as flank fodder either inside the shithouse or in elbow. So those are the general building placements for aggressive and passive holds on the third point. Now the main strategy of this area should be based around the fact that this is the longest stretch of track between the points on the entire map. So you really want to make sure you're not giving up a lot of ground for free. A common mistake that a lot of teams seem to make on defense is that they let their enemy push the cart up until there's barely any track left, and it puts a lot of pressure on them for no reason. That's why an aggressive hold is ideal for this point, because we want to make blue team work for every inch and waste as much time as possible. Remember, the objective on defense is to delay, not to destroy. So preserving your life while also keeping the enemy busy is the key to winning on red team. As I said in the previous 2 points, mini sentries are never out of the question. You can place them in exactly all of the same spots you'd place a regular sentry gun. It just allows you to play more on the flank and spend more of your metal on keeping the dispenser alive and fully upgraded. The amount of open air on third makes any sentry gun, big or small, extremely effective for keeping airborne classes grounded. So don't hesitate to use whichever type of sentry you feel comfortable with. As you can tell, I'm trying my best to dispel the stereotype that minis are only good on offense and wrenches are only good on defense. This is not true at all. It's all down to personal preference. And the last thing to mention about third is that when the point is finally capped, the blue team spawn room is moved up from the tunnel and into the house, exactly where red team spawn room was at the start of the round. So keep that in mind and don't stick around too long in the valley or around the cliff area if they manage to cap the third point, because they will start spawning a lot closer. And moving on to the last point, this is probably the only part of this map that I'm not a big fan of because it's so difficult to push when you stack engineers, or even if red team has a single good engineer, it can be nearly impossible to take down the sentry gun if it's placed on this balcony. But I'll be going over the ideal spots for you to pull that kind of thing off, and then I'll talk more about strategies for the general last hold area. The sentry gun on last almost always should go up on the balcony. The biggest reason being that from the main entrance, the sentry gun can practically never be effectively Ubered into because there's basically no way for an Ubered pair to make it from the main entrance all the way over to the staircase on the other side of the pit before their invulnerability wears off, unless there's absolutely no resistance from the red team. The height advantage that the balcony provides, as well as very limited ways for anyone to actually walk up to the balcony without getting spotted, makes the engineer is basically invulnerable from anywhere below him. The default spots for the sentry gun are on the balcony here, here, and here. For the most part, this all comes down to where the cart is and if the blue team has control of the apartments and or across. The only solid way for the sentry guns on the balcony to be attacked is from the adjacent angles in the windows across for them, so asking your team to keep control of these areas is extremely important for holding this point. I don't recommend building the sentry gun in the opposite corner on the left side of the upper balcony because it's really easy for a sniper to see it from main and can be spammed out from a more accessible angle. It's best to just keep the sentry gun on the right side of the balcony the entire time. I also highly discourage engineers from building sentry guns anywhere that's not on a balcony unless it's an emergency, because it's just way too easy for an Ubered push to get up close and personal with it by simply walking around the corner from main. Stick to the balcony when building guns on last point. It has remained one of the most inaccessible sentry nest areas in the game for a reason. The dispenser is actually best used as a spy blocker on last point, mainly because it prevents the only viable class for getting up to the balcony from doing exactly that. However, you need to place it in a very, very specific way in order to fully prevent a spy from jumping over it. You can test it yourself by crouch jumping next to it, and if you can't jump over it, a spy can't jump over it. Just remember to not build a teleporter that goes from outside of the balcony to inside of the nest, because an intelligent spy will take advantage of that in a heartbeat. You could also place the dispenser on the concrete around the corner from main, but it will probably take a lot of damage down there, and if a spy saps it, you'll have to jump off of the balcony to take care of it. In general, the need for a supportive dispenser isn't really too important anywhere else because of the abundance of medium health packs around the crucial holding points, as well as easy access to the spawn room's resupply cabinet, so denying spies a way to get up to the balcony is honestly the most effective way to use the dispenser on upward last. As for the teleporter, you'd normally never really need to use one on any payload map's last point, since the red team doesn't need to travel any lengthy distance at all in order to get to the objective. However, because of how important it is for your team to keep control of the windows and apartments across from the balcony, a really great teleporter exit is in the little hallway way just inside of the opening that leads to the crates. What this does is encourage players to get into the open area across from the nest and hold it down so that enemies don't get up there and spam your sentry gun. Normally, it would be pretty difficult to walk up there without having to deal with the spam and sniper sightlines that are coming from the main choke point, so having a teleporter that provides a safe travel to the area across from you can be extremely helpful. You could also place it right behind the crate so that it's harder to notice if an enemy does eventually make it up to the upper section. However, it can be dangerous to place a teleporter there because it puts the user in a sniper sightline for a split second when they come out from behind the crates. Normally, it would be pretty difficult to risk walking all the way from the safety of the balcony to the other side to put a teleporter exit down, but if you think ahead, it can actually be pretty simple. All you need to do when you're backing out of third is to walk up there and drop one down just before continuing onto the balcony to build up the rest of your nest. Just be sure to communicate to your team that if you want to get up there quickly, just take the teleporter right after they spawn. And just like the points that preceded it, you can justify using mini sentries to defend the last point as well. However, because of how powerful the balcony setup can be and your unlimited supply of metal via resupply cabinet, it would be better in the long run to just use the Jag to build a leveled sentry gun really quickly. The only time I can see the gunslinger coming into play on last is if you have absolutely no time at all to build a sentry gun and you just need to put out some fast damage at the last second. You could also just use the gunslinger to play supportive engineer and help keep control of the flank or battle it out in the across area along with the rest of your team. So those are the general placements for buildings on last. The biggest thing about the basic strategy of this point is if you have control of across, you have control of the game. Just like in Star Wars, if you have the high ground, you will win most engagements. So if you have a sentry gun on the balcony and your team has control of the area across from it, you will always have the higher ground and the blue team will always be at a disadvantage. The only people who should be hanging out down below are the flank classes. You and everyone else should be up high where no one can hurt you. If your team does not have control of across, it makes it that much easier for a soldier with a direct hit to walk up there and just two-shot your sentry gun for free and cause the entire defensive hold to crumble as they take control of the high ground and just rain down on your team from above. So if you see that this area is open and unclaimed, ask your power classes to get up there as soon as possible. If you have a teleporter that goes up there, let them know so they can take it. Overall, defense on Upward can be both rewarding and challenging, and it favors all kinds of playstyles for engineers of varying skill levels. I especially love how the map's design also allows so many points to be defensively played in different parts. It's almost like there are multiple stages to each area instead of the predetermined cap points dictating where everything should be happening, and it can be a lot of fun. So now that we've covered the typical defensive strategy for the engineer, let's switch teams here and talk about playing offense on Upward. For the most part, the engineer should be playing near the cart whenever possible, especially on the first point. There never needs to be more than one engineer on blue team ever. So if you're the second engineer and your team is getting spawn camped, just cut it out and play heavy for a bit so that you can at least start playing the game. The cart can almost always at least get pushed to the very first sharp turn near the front of the house, and then after that you kind of have to rely on your power classes to push in and destroy the sentry guns and chase away their players, or otherwise kill enough of them to make it safe to push the cart again. While these pushes happen, you can take this time to build a sentry gun near the cart somewhere to deny scouts from getting too close. And this little plank that we built a mini behind on defense also works both ways, and be wary of spies hanging out in the corners when you come out of spawn. You can shoot into the more obvious hiding spots to check for cloaked ones. Once the cart can't physically be pushed any further without putting your life in danger, you can build a dispenser either for the power classes to use over on the left side near the top of the stairs, or you can build it behind this little rock here to support the flank on the right. You can also place down a teleporter entrance in this little bush to get a head start on that, and once you've thrown all of your buildings out, you can start to play on the flank a bit more. Try to look for an opening. If the far side of the house is unoccupied, you can walk around to see if you can harass people hiding behind there. If you see that the playground isn't too populated, you could use this rock to quickly jump onto the platform and start shooting people on the other side from above. Just be careful about a possible sentry gun behind the house that may or may not be able to see you depending on where you stand. If anything, you can often take a scoped in sniper by surprise and two-shot him with a shotgun. If you feel like assisting the main push, you can switch to the Wrangler and put a sentry gun at the very top of the stairs and start firing down on people below. This will often direct a lot of fire towards your bulky shielded gun, so it may leave an opening for the rest of your team to push in with you without getting focused down right away. After your team has taken the first point, you can start pushing the cart again until you get to the mouth of the tunnel. Around here, you can check to see if your team has taken control of the hill above the tunnel or not. If they have, you can run up there really quick and place a teleporter exit somewhere hidden, like in this bush here. If you have the metal for it, you can even put a sentry up here too to help deny people people from jumping on them. Then you can go back and return to pushing the cart. While you're in the tunnel, you may encounter a fight with people who are guarding the cart, and you should fight them. You have a cart to heal off of, and at this particular moment, your life isn't worth more than the average soldier or scout, so try your best to put damage into as many defenders as possible. If you die while pushing the cart, don't worry, your respawn timer is much shorter than the red team's. Not to mention, when you respawn, you can upgrade your teleporter, and if your dispenser is still alive from when you were pushing the first point, you can take it through the teleporter and put it up with your team on the hill. If your team didn't end up taking the hill, they will most likely be holding back at the tunnel entrance near the first point. If this is the case, you should take the time to move the dispenser up to where they're holding and place the teleporter somewhere nearby as well. If you can't push the cart anymore without dying, you can help your team push by providing shotgun fire and aggressive sentry guns. Hopefully your team will have eventually pushed the red team all the way back to the classic passive hold on the porch outside of their spawn room. At this point, after you've pushed the cart until just outside of the mouth of the tunnel exit, you can wrap around to the cliff side and start to work the flank. You can often easily see the red team and the sentry gun from around the bee hut, so you might want to use your pistol or a wrangled sentry gun to cause a distraction and put damage into their grouped up players. If you're lucky, you may even be able to walk all the way around behind them and set up a teleporter that you can use to ninja and take the enemy by surprise. If you're feeling cheeky or just want to fight with the rest of your power classes, you can put an aggressive sentry gun up on this overhang and shoot people from the high ground to chase them out. You could even coordinate with the spy to sap the sentry and then jump down out of the apartment window to kill the enemy engineer. If all else fails, it's often very easy to simply walk up to the cart from the cliffside, crouch behind it to avoid being seen, and then sneak the cap. Remember, capping second will move the blue spawn forward and the red spawn back, making it very difficult for them to maintain holding the porch without getting run over, so capping the point is really important. After you cap second, you should, as soon as possible, reset your teleporters. Place a new entrance in front of the forward spawn in the tunnel, and then go back to pushing the cart. If you have time, or if you think it's worth it, you can run back to where you had your dispenser at on second, and carry that to where your new team's hold will be before returning to the cart. Generally, the blue team holds either inside of the house or somewhere behind it, depending on how aggressive the red team is with their spam. Ideally, you want the sentry gun far back, away from the door, but still looking at it so it can kill anyone who tries to enter. A good spot for the dispenser is at the top of the stairs here, and then you can put your teleporter exit just behind it on the middle platform that goes down to underneath. Just be aware of the flank classes and spies sneaking around underneath and finding it, but most of the time the people using the dispenser can act as a lookout for that kind of thing. I don't recommend putting the dispenser or the teleporter up near the shuttered door because there's a pretty nasty sniper sightline when looking out from the cap point or the tracks. If you find that your team is getting spammed out really bad in the house, you should just put your stuff behind this wall so it doesn't get destroyed, and your team can use them without getting too much damage on them. After you've placed all your buildings down, you can start pushing the payload again. Approaching the cart can be difficult because snipers love to stand on the top of the cliff near the cap point, or even all the way out on the track, so make sure to avoid getting killed when walking over there. You can use this little side passage to approach it if you need to. If the enemy team is holding up at the edge of the cliff, this point can be a nightmare to edge the cart time on, especially since there are multiple sections that require constant pushing, so try and time your cart pushes with your team's aggression so that the demo man and pyros are distracted while you play the objective. It's always a great idea to put the sentry near you to deny people who see that the cart is getting pushed and try to stop you, and this is also a great point to use the short circuit on because you basically have unlimited ammo when standing behind the cart, and most of the time you'll be having to deal with rocket and sticky spam being thrown at you. Once you get the cart to the final roundabout, you can place a sentry gun in this little bush here and start to make the final few feet. This semi-hidden gun is great for preventing scouts and pyros from totally destroying you when they try to deny you the cap. Generally though, you should try and wait until your team has taken moderate control of the cliffside before finalizing this cap. However, you can always sneak it by hiding behind the cart if red team isn't paying too much attention. If you feel like playing with the rest of your team and pushing, you can help by putting a sentry gun on the upper platform to take their attention away from people pushing choke, or just to put out damage during an uber push. If you really want to be annoying, you could even walk all the way around underneath the tracks into shithouse and kill people looking the other way or otherwise cause a disruption. After the blue team has taken the cliff, you can either help push the cart, get a head start on replacing teleporters by running back to the forward spawn, or keep the pressure up by running through the spiral to either apartments or underneath to the lower area and flank them with mini sentries. This decision pretty much comes down to who is alive, who is dead, and if you think you have an opportunity to be aggressive or not. If you choose to play it safe and get your buildings moved up as fast as possible, you can finish the cap and then walk over to the forward spawn and replace the teleporter entrance. While you're here, you can also move the dispenser at the top of these lower stairs up to the front with you. Usually a good place to start is just outside of main in the valley. The dispenser is helpful to have along this little wall, and then the teleporter exit is useful to have in this little bush here or inside of the shithouse. Your team's number one priority, as you might have already guessed, is to take control of the upper areas of apartments and across. Most of the time your team is going to be pushing through this little doorway near the main entrance, so keeping your dispenser up over here while they try and push is very important. On the last point, if you happen to have more than 2 minutes left on the clock, I suggest trying to set up a leveled sentry gun instead of minis. Because of how little distance you have to walk in order to win, it's much more important to prevent the red team from overpowering you than it is to have a quick sentry gun build. However, either way works pretty well. It's just mostly down to whichever one you feel more comfortable using. Typically, it's a good idea to put the sentry on the tracks in the valley so it can deny the red team from getting too aggressive in main, and it can shut down people who try to flank you from behind through the door leading into spiral, or if they walk through and around the elbow. If dealing with the flank isn't a huge problem, I really like to put a mini sentry or a level 2 sentry up on this crate here. It is very aggressive, so make sure no one is standing there when you place it, but it can be an amazing backup for when you start edging the cap on the cart. People who run over to you to try and stop you often get tunnel visioned and don't notice the sentry and will end up getting killed by it. It's also worth noting that a level 3 sentry gun's barrel is actually too high to shoot effectively while it's on this crate, so keeping it at level 2 and under is the best course of action if you want to place it in this aggressive spot. If pushing through the main entrance starts to become difficult for your team to manage, and it often very well can be, snipers watching from the back can be a horrible thing to deal with if they have decent aim, not to mention the amount of spam coming through this choke can be extremely overwhelming. So don't be afraid to switch up the building placements to encourage your team to go a different route. Usually, if pushing through main isn't working, you can try pushing through apartments from the spiral staircase. You can place the teleporter in this corner and then the dispenser on the platform right before the door frame to support your team while they try and take control of the high ground. This also provides them two options for the directions that they want to go. Either try and power their way through taking across or flanking downwards and underneath. Once your team has control of across, you can once again start to focus on pushing the cart. Keep a close eye on the kill feed for enemy sentry guns going down and time your pushing attempts accordingly. You can often rely on picking up this medium health pack near the point and throwing down distraction mini sentries while edging the cart closer and closer. Oftentimes, if the only real threat is a sentry gun, you can manage to push the cart while hiding behind it, out of the sentry gun's line of sight. Remember, in this moment, your life isn't terribly important, so sacrificing yourself to try and get the cart in the hole is usually your number one priority if you don't have spies constantly attacking your teleporter or dispenser. If all goes well, you should be able to contribute nicely to overpowering the defensive hold and tipping the cart over the final edge to win the game. So this has been the complete engineer's blueprint for the Payload map, Upward. If you have any questions or suggestions on how to play this map as engineer, feel free to leave a comment about it. And remember, if anything about this map looked different than what you're used to, chances are the map has been updated since this video's original release, and you should check the description for a link to an update video going over the changes and how they might affect the strategies discussed in this episode. So yep, thanks so much for watching, and I hope this video helped you in some way. Let me know in the comments what map you'd like me to see talk about in the next episode of the Engineer's Blueprints. I will talk to you nieces and nephews next time. Bye-bye.